Well, we return now to the middle of Act 2 of our story of Samson, as we've seen the wedding feast, the tragedy that ensued at the end of the wedding feast, the rising tide of violence, and all of it pointing to the seriousness of the consequences of Samson's disobedience to the Lord. And now we come to yet a further escalation of the violence, but at the same time, I think one of those slightly comic elements that almost sets the tragedy, the broader tragedy, more clearly before us, because we come in Judges 15, verse 4, to this episode where we read, "So Samson went and caught 300 foxes." Now, probably the number 300 is intended to be an escalation of the 30 suits of clothes. So we've had 30, now things are up to 300. But surely that's a comic scene, isn't it? Him trying to corral 300 foxes. Foxes are notorious for not being easily corralled, I would think. And then not only is he catching 300 foxes, but he's going to take them 2 by 2 and tie their tails around a lighted torch. I mean, this is a really silly scene. The Three Stooges would have done a great movie of this one particular part. Can you just imagine it? The fox is yipping as he's trying to tie the tails, and the torches lighted and going every which way. And he turned them tail to tail and put a torch between each pair of tails. And when he had set fire to the torches, he let the foxes go into the standing grain of the Philistines and set fire to the stacked grain and the standing grain, as well as the olive orchards. Suddenly, this comedy has gotten deadly serious. Here's harvested grain that they need for the winter. It's being burned up. Here's standing grain, not yet reaped. It's being burned up. And the olive trees from which they will press the oil that is absolutely essential to their diet a good part of the year are being burned down. So now suddenly this comic scene turns deadly serious as he's attacking their very survivability through the winter. People by and large had only the food they grew. And suddenly this has become even more serious, and the cycle of violence is just building and building. I think the last lecture I said it went down and down. Well, it's going both down and up at the same time. It's getting deeper in its seriousness and higher in the level of violence. And the Philistines said, "Who has done this?" And they said, "Samson, the son-in-law of the Timnite, because he has taken his wife and given her to his companions." And the Philistines came up and burned her and her father with fire. Now here is a remarkable act of cowardice, amongst other things. They attack not Samson, the attacker, but they attack the unexpecting father and wife, father-in-law and wife of Samson, to punish him for what he has done. And so again, we see how this is just going from bad to worse at every point. And again, we see the tragedy of those who depart from the Lord. She had identified with my people against her husband and his people, and therefore she had identified with the uncircumcised Philistines against the covenant keepers of God, and she had done this, in part at least, because they'd threatened to burn her alive. And what comes of it all? She's burned alive. And I don't know if there's something slightly comic about that. There's something ironic about that. In this tragedy, there are ironies upon ironies that the Lord wants us to sense what real tragedy is taking place here. And once again, Samson responds. Verse 7, "And Samson said to them, 'If this is what you do, I swear I will be avenged on you, and after that I will quit.'" What's he quitting? I think he's quitting the cycle of violence. I said this. He's saying, in effect, this has gone on long enough. We can't go at this forever. So I'm going to avenge my wife and father-in-law, and then I'm opting out. And what he'll do is he'll go into hiding. He'll think, if they can't find me, they've already killed a lot of the principles in this, so if I'm in hiding, they won't be able to find me, and maybe we'll be able to put all this behind us. And we're not told exactly what he does to the Philistines. It's a little obscure there in verse 8. And he struck them hip and thigh with a great blow, and then he went and hid. So there was a great blow that struck him hard, but we don't have any details. Maybe the storyteller is thinking it's time to speed this story up. Maybe he's worrying it's getting bogged down in violence after violence, in part because he knows he has more violence yet to tell. But in any case, Samson thinks he's done. Samson thinks it's over. But remember, the Lord is at work in this. The Lord has a purpose in this. The Lord is using this as an opportunity. And so the Lord continues this in a sense, and continues it with a new dimension. Because what do we read next? Then the Philistines came up and encamped in Judah and made a raid on Lehi. And the men of Judah said, "Why have you come up against us?" And they said, "We have come up to bind Samson, to do to him as he did to us." Then 3,000 men of Judah went down to the place where Samson was hiding. Suddenly, this is no longer just a kind of wedding, family, neighborhood problem. The Philistines are outraged at what Samson has done, and they've come with an army. An army so big that 3,000 men of Judah don't want to have anything to do with them. They don't want to tangle with them. So we're not told exactly how large the army of the Philistines is, but it's large enough that the men of Judah are completely intimidated. And so this has really shifted now from simply a family struggle to a national struggle. There are armies involved now. And this is the Lord's way of moving Samson from simply being a selfish, self-indulgent individual to having to take responsibility for the people, to having to take responsibility for what his actions have brought upon his people. And so the Lord is moving Samson in a direction that he never really intended. As Samson said, "I want to be quit of all this. I'm tired of all this fussing and feuding with the Philistines." But the Lord is acting to force him into an even more public role. Now, this is perhaps a spot to pause and say, we could perhaps think of all the lessons we ought not to learn from this passage up to this point, particularly about the fox's tails and the burning of the grain and the olive trees. I let my mind wander and I thought, what might a modern American Christian write as a book out of this section of Samson about foxtails and burning grain and olive trees? Well, I came up with a great idea. Imagine a book with the title, "Serving Like Samson." That might sell, huh? That sounds like you could learn something useful from it. And the subtitle would be, "Tips on Brightening the Corner Where You Are." Isn't that nice? I like that. I entertain myself way too much with this book. And now think of the chapters. If one of you wants to actually write this book, that's okay. I'll work with you on it. But think of the chapters. The first chapter might be, if you're serving like Samson, be innovative. Try something new. See, that's a hallmark of American Christianity. We're always looking for something new. I don't think very many churches have made effective use of foxes. Anyway, be innovative. Try something new. Chapter 2, use materials at hand. Anything will do. Chapter 3, take risks. Life is an adventure. Chapter 4, don't think small. There's much to do. Chapter 5, use many helpers. Many tails make light work. Chapter 6, focus on felt needs. They all need bread and oil. Chapter 7, redirect priorities. They can do without bread and oil. Chapter 8, expect resistance. Life is not easy. Chapter 9, persevere. Right is right. Now you see, these are all useful life lessons, none of them taught by the book of Judges. So we have to keep at studying the Bible to find out what God is really saying, because that's what we need, not our little clever sort of poetic inspirations we might draw from the text that God really doesn't intend at all. So, all right, enough for the comic relief in this session today. Samson's in hiding. What's going to happen? You notice this is a story that's told with tension. What's going to happen? Well, there's an army after him. Are they going to find him? How's the army going to find him? Well, they're not even going to look for him. They're going to send his brothers from the tribe of Judah after him. These men of Judah are so discouraged that they're not willing to resist at all. We read verse 11, then 3,000 men of Judah went down to the cleft of the rock at Edom and said to Samson, do you not know that the Philistines are rulers over us? What then is this that you have done to us? You notice the fatalism there. It's sort of like his mother, who was barren but not praying because she was just reconciled to the hopelessness of her state. This is a whole people that are hopeless, reconciled to their defeat. There are 3,000 of us, but we can't resist the Philistines. They rule over us. And they've gone to Samson now, and they're going to turn him over. And he said to them, as they did to me, so have I done to them. And the 3,000 said to him, we have come down to bind you, that we may give you into the hands of the Philistines. And Samson said to them, swear to me that you will not attack me yourselves. Now this is interesting. This is the first and in some ways the only moment at which Samson is a leader to the people of Israel. He's lived his life entirely for himself up to this point. The people have never come to him for advice. He's never given advice to the people. And now there are 3,000 men of Judah, and they're determined to turn him over to the Philistines. They could have done it easily, or they could have killed him themselves and just handed the corpse over to the Philistines, which is what Samson is a little afraid they might have in mind. And Samson is now beginning to lead, beginning to exert leadership. Don't kill me. Agree that you won't kill me. And they agree. And they said to him, no, we will only bind you and give you into their hands. We will surely not kill you. So they bound him with 2 new ropes and brought him up from the rock. And the Philistines see him coming, and the Philistines start rejoicing over him. Verse 14, the Philistines came shouting to meet him. This too is a foreshadowing, isn't it? They're going to be shouting and rejoicing over him in the temple of Dagon at the end of this story. It's just intriguing as you read it, how this is so cleverly written that all sorts of things are sort of foreshadowed and we're prepared. Things are echoing through this whole story. And here the Philistines are so triumphant. They've utterly intimidated the 3,000 men of Judah. Samson is bound with new ropes. They've won the day. But they didn't take God into account. They didn't take God into account. And we're told that the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him, and the ropes that were on his arms became as flax that has caught fire, and his bonds melted off his hands. There's been a lot of burning in this story up to now. People burned to death, property burned. The angel of the Lord goes up in a flame, and here it's as if the bonds are burned off. They are so weak and insignificant. And then this memorable part of the story, he found a fresh jawbone of a donkey. Now that's important. Have you ever seen the jawbone of a donkey? Me either. But what happens when an animal dies in a wilderness or a desert, a hot region? Sometimes I go out to Palm Springs, and I went out there to preach last summer. I thought maybe I'd hit a cool wave in July. I was wrong. It was 119 degrees the day I preached in Palm Springs. And a friend gave me a T-shirt that said, well, at least it's a dry heat. And it was a T-shirt with skeletons on it, because that's what happens in that kind of heat. In no time at all, that's all that's left are the bones. And if bones are left in the sun very long, they become brittle. So a brittle jawbone, an old jawbone, isn't going to do you any good as a weapon. And so this is a fresh jawbone. We don't know exactly where he got it, whether from a living donkey or a dead donkey. But again, I think this is the kind of story that boys and girls would like, or at least the boys. This jawbone dripping blood and still flesh on it, with the teeth, no doubt, in the part that he's using. And he uses this as a weapon. And the Lord gives him strength. And he kills 1,000 Philistines. Now that's almost unbelievable, isn't it? If we didn't believe in the Bible, we'd have trouble believing this. 1,000 people is a lot of people to kill. But the Lord has strengthened him. The Lord has given him the energy to accomplish this and to prove victorious. And so the Philistines flee away. And this is probably Samson's first act as a judge. Because all of a sudden, he's no longer a private figure, he's a public figure. He's representing his people. He's almost a champion like David fighting Goliath. He's one man against the enemy. Here is Samson with the jawbone of an ass, accomplishing victory for the Lord, scaring off the enemy. And you see there, then in verse 20, just a couple of verses later, at the end of this chapter, at the end of this second act, we read, and he judged Israel in the days of the Philistines 20 years. That's the first time the word judge is actually used relative to Samson. We've seen other things pointing towards his becoming a judge, but that's the first time the actual word is used. And here we have it then. This is the beginning of his functioning as a judge. Now you notice what's remarkable about this. We are now really almost 3/4 of the way through the story, and he's only just become a judge. So the Lord is all about preparation for understanding who Samson is and what he's doing and what motivates him. And what we've been seeing right along is that who Samson is, he's a man consecrated to the Lord by the Spirit of the Lord on the one hand, and a man dedicated to his own selfish ambitions on the other. And these are really at war in him, in conflict in him. Yet the Lord is accomplishing his purpose. The Lord said he will be a judge, and the Lord has made him a judge. And now what does he do? And this is important because so much of Samson's life could be read as a betrayal of the Lord. But here in this remarkable moment of having become leader and judge of the people, we read in verse 18, and he was very thirsty. We can imagine that's right. That's probably an understatement, huh? What we see as we read along is he's at the point of dying of thirst. He's completely dehydrated from having fought 1,000 men. And he was very thirsty, and he called upon the Lord. He prayed. He's not in much of what he does, much of an example of faith. But here, in this extreme moment, he prays. And this is a foreshadowing too, because in the next extreme moment of his life, when he's in the temple of Dagon, he'll pray again. And so there is deep-seated in the soul of Samson, for all of his sin, for all of his disobedience, a seed of faith that the Lord never lets go out, that the Lord preserves. And in these extreme moments, he prays. And he says, you have granted this great salvation by the hand of your servant. You see, he sees himself called to be a judge. He's working as a judge. What were the judges about? They were deliverers. They were saviors of the people. And he sees that the Lord has used him in this role now to deliver his people from this oppression. He's going to roll back those Philistine armies and liberate his people. It's beginning. You have granted me this great salvation by the hand of your servant, and shall I now die of thirst and fall into the hands of the uncircumcised? Are you going to let me die now, Lord, and let these Philistines come back and claim my body? Are you going to let me die now so that whatever beginning of salvation I've been able to introduce will all be for naught because the Philistines will just come flooding back when they hear that I'm dead? And this illustrates one of the interesting principles of prayer that we see over and over again in the Old Testament and that sometimes we neglect, I think, as Christians, and that's the principle of reasoning with God in prayer. Reasoning with God in prayer. When you ask God for something, tell him why he ought to give it to you. If you can't think of a reason, then don't ask for it. That's, I think, why we cannot pray for football games. Baseball, of course, is different. But why we can't pray for things of no consequence, because we can offer no reasons to the Lord. What Samson is saying here is, Lord, let me live, because if you don't let me live, it'll bring shame to your name. The good work you've been doing will all be for naught. Now, I don't think that's presumptuous. Sometimes our reasoning isn't good and the Lord doesn't give us what we want. But I think it really helps focus what we're asking for. Is there a reason for what we're asking? Is there a reason that advances the glory of God and advances his kingdom? I think when we can say, yes, we have a reason, then it's much more likely the Lord is going to hear us and bless us and honor us. And what a wonderful thing happens. Verse 19, and God split open the hollow place that is at Lehi, and water came out from it, and he drank. His spirit returned, and he revived. This is the place that ever after was known as the place where he called on the Lord. And what did the Lord do? He gave him the water of life. He gave him the water of life, miraculously. And this whole story is then so inclined to say the Lord provides for his people, even for those who've been so disobedient. But the Lord can use his own. The Lord will accomplish his purpose. The Lord had promised he would raise up a judge, and he rose up a judge. May have taken 3 chapters, but here is Samson the judge who will judge Israel for 20 years. And when we come back next time, we'll find those 20 years summarized in 3 verses. So stay tuned. Thank you all very much.